Welcome to Ravinheart Rendition Shop Time, and we're talking to Shannon Rogers today. Hey, Shannon, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on?
Well, I had some questions, and I emailed Shannon, and I think it was a little more than the email would have been to go over them. So we decided we'd record this and talk to some people about hand crank grinders.
And before everybody starts rolling their eyes and going, whoop, next, I gotta say, I bought one. I've had mine now for more than a year. It was March of 2011 is when I got my first one. And it is probably in the top three of search terms that brings people to my website now. There's obviously a lot of people looking for hand crank grinders out there because I get an enormous amount of Google traffic for the term hand cranked grinder. So there's got to be someone else out there who's interested in this besides you, Andrew. So don't feel bad.
Well, my interest sparked partly because I was sharpening one of my lathe tools, and it's kind of close to where my scroll saw is, and I'm like, this is throwing uh, dust from the wheel and metal shavings all over my scroll saw.
Yeah.
And normally I don't like to grind down here because I don't want the metal shavings on the wood and everything else. And well, honestly, I'm too lazy to run out in the garage and use the other grinder out there.
Hmm.
And I was thinking, one of them hand crank grinders, usually I don't need to do that much grinding. I honestly don't hit the grinder with most of my stuff too often anyway.
Right.
But when I do, I was like, that would be a nice addition to my shop. But I didn't know a damn thing about them.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, there's not that much to know.
Mm.
It's a pretty simple, well, famous last words, simple topic. So what do you want to know?
Well, when you go out there, I was doing some searching on eBay and on Craigslist and a few things, and I seen quite a few different ones. Is there anything like brand-wise to either look for or stay away from?
Right. And when you asked me this question originally, I said, well, let me just do a little bit of research to make sure, and because my initial reaction is no. I don't think there's really any particular brand to avoid or shoot for. It's not like Miller's Falls makes great miter boxes. Um, and honestly, there were so many of these things made by every Tom, Dick, and Harry manufacturer out there that I don't think it makes a difference. There's really not that much to it. It's a handle, it's an arbor, and it's a couple of gears inside the gearbox to create the what do you call that? Ratio?
Yeah, the gear ratio to make it
Gear
spin.
ratio,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. One turn of the handle equals something like three complete revolutions of the wheel. I don't actually know my ratio on my two grinders, but there are gears in there that do that, and that's really it. So, how hard can it be to make that? And seeing as once you got really past World War II into the 50s and 60s, everything was powered at that point.
Mhm.
So for the most part, you're looking when we say when you're looking for vintage tools, if you're looking for vintage Stanley or Distons, always shoot for pre-World War II. That's
Mhm.
kind of the deadline when everything all went to hell.
Yep.
And quality went through the floor and just you don't want to buy that stuff anymore. Well, as it is, just because it's a hand cranked grinder, it's pretty much a pre-World War II thing anyway. So the materials are pretty good. The workmanship is pretty good. I don't think if you find one, don't worry about the brand.
Okay.
There are other things, however, that I would say pay attention to. Of course, really, I mean, the best source for this is eBay. I just did a search a couple minutes ago, and there's like 91 results for
Yeah.
hand crank grinder. There's lots of them on there. They're like 10 to 20 bucks. And I haven't, like when you go looking for a hand plane or something like that, you see the $10 ones, and then occasionally there's a $120 one that's been fully restored or it's rare. I don't think those exist in hand crank grinders. They're all pretty much the same. I haven't seen any that have been restored. Maybe if there was enough of a demand, someone would start actually cleaning them up and restoring them. But you think about grinding, it kicks up a lot of dust from the stone. If it gets wet, it gets all gunked up. So these grinders look horrible. And they look really beat up and ugly. Most of the time, the stones are really tiny and
Yeah.
completely glazed. So it's not going to look pretty no matter what it is. So I don't think anybody even has the shall we say, the the moral cojones to list one for $50 because they look terrible. So that's the good news. You can get into these really, really cheaply on eBay, and you've got plenty to choose from. The one thing is they generally, when they're listed, they'll say 4-inch grinding wheel. Well, 4 inches is kind of small.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about hollow grinding, you hold the chisel up there and it creates a slight hollow. It moves more metal in the center of the bevel than on the edges.
Yeah.
The smaller the diameter of the wheel, the more radical that hollow is going to be, to the point where you can actually weaken the very edge, the very tip. Imagine taking a big semicircle right out of the edge of your bevel and you end up with this little thin spot.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will tell you that 6 inches is kind of as small as you can go. Now, the minute I say that, someone's going to disagree with me, and I know a Japanese guy that, can sharpen things so sharp that it cuts you from across the room, and he uses a 3-inch wheel.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, rule of thumb, 6 inches. A lot of people will go bigger, 8-inch, 12-inch wheels, and you get an even shallower hollow grind. If you want to get into freehand sharpening at all, the hollow grind's great.
Mm-hmm.
It really makes it stable. So you'll see these hand crank grinders, and they'll say 4-inch grinding wheel. What has happened is someone has picked up this grinder, they've measured the existing wheel and said, it's 4 inches, so it's a 4-inch grinder. If you look at them, you'll see a huge gap. You'll see kind of on the metal housing, the gearbox itself, you'll see these kind of arms that poke out.
Yep.
And they have a radius, an inside curve. Well, if you take a step back and look at that, you realize that's defining the outer dimension of the wheel. So most of those were 6-inch wheels. I haven't seen a hand crank grinder that wasn't meant to take a 6-inch wheel yet. I'm sure they exist, but I haven't seen one yet. So don't worry about the wheel size. In fact, the first thing you do when you get it is take that old wheel off, and you'll get a new one. Yeah. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Who knows who did what to that wheel already anyway.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, they're horribly glazed, so you could take a diamond dresser to it to get it unglazed, and it's going to be a 2-inch wheel at that point.
Yeah.
So, I actually, for some weird reason, I kept mine, threw them in a drawer in my shop, thinking, I wonder if there's anything I could ever do with this. Mm-hmm. It's probably just being a pack rat. So, so that you're going to take it off anyway. So don't worry about the condition of the wheel. Don't worry about that 4-inch thing. So far, I have never seen an eBay seller who's given me the information that I actually want. So inevitably, you're going to have to send them a question. Mm-hmm. And the question would be, what is the size of the arbor?
Okay.
Most important, what is the size of the arbor? Most of them are smaller than what our modern grinders would be. A lot of modern grinders are, 1/2-inch arbors, I think?
I think so. I think one of mine actually might even be a 5/8. Yeah.
5/8 is pretty typical.
Yeah.
Most of the modern grinding wheels have a 1-inch bore through the wheel, and they come with spacers for 3/8, 1/2-inch, 5/8, and 3/4, I think is what. I know Norton 3X wheels, which, let's jump ahead a little bit. That's what I recommend, a Norton 3X wheel.
Okay. Tools
for Working Wood has them. They come with the spacers. But most of these have a 3/8-inch arbor, at least, well, listen to me. Most of them, the two that I've bought and the couple that I've looked at where I've asked this question, so let's say four of them I've seen have a 3/8-inch arbor. I have to imagine that's pretty standardized. This was a manufacturing. They were made after the age of industrialism, after mass production came into being, so they're probably all pretty similar. But that's the first question you definitely want to ask. What is the diameter of that arbor? Because if it's something weird and you can't get a spacer to step up to that 1-inch bore of a Norton 3X wheel, you're going to have to make something, piece of wood, piece of lignum vitae or something like that, turn to that diameter with the proper borehole through it. I mean, you can do it. Just recognize that you're going to have to do that.
Okay.
For that matter, there are some wheels out there that don't have a 1-inch bore. Tools for Working Wood sells 1/4-inch and 1/8-inch wide wheels, which are great for getting on the inside of curved tools like carving gouges.
Sure.
If you need to, where the first thing I'm thinking of is a scribing gouge, an in-canal gouge where the bevel's on the inside. Grinding that you can't do it on a 1-inch or 3/4-inch wide wheel. Those narrower wheels come with a 1/2-inch bore. So if you have a 5/8-inch arbor, guess what?
That ain't gonna work.
I'm not going to try to re-drill a hole through a grinding stone. I inevitably will throw it off, by doing
Yep.
that.
The wobble.
I'm, yeah, not Roy Underhill. I'm not going to reforge and regrind and go out into the woods and pick up my own whetstone and grind it. That's just not me. So, arbor diameter is going to be huge. The other thing I'll ask them is, can you remove the wheel? We all know that yes, you can, but are you able to remove the wheel? Because a lot of these things, they've gotten wet, they've rusted, and it's frozen.
Yep.
And there are lots of different things you can do to, vapor rust, different things to remove the rust to kind of loosen that up. But the problem is there's no gear lock on these. When you go to change the table saw blade, you've got a second wrench or there's a button you push to lock the arbor in place. There is no arbor lock on these things. So what you're doing is holding the hand crank with one hand,
and turning with the
hoping it doesn't turn, and turning with the other hand. It's very awkward. You can't put a lot of torque on it. So I know one guy that I've swapped emails with 4 or 5 times, still can't get it unfrozen, and it's been like 3 months.
Oh wow!
He's tried so many different things. So that would be the other thing. I would ask the person, please take the wheel off. Can you take the wheel off? And for the most part, eBay sellers are nice people.
Yeah.
They're going to do these things for you, especially if you don't send them one question at a time. Send them all these questions. So ask them if they can actually take the wheel off. Is that nut unfrozen? That's kind of a big deal. You want to know that the actual bench clamping mechanism works. The threaded rod that clamps to the bench is not stripped. Most part you can tell that by looking at the picture, but there are some out there that they're not going to work. If it's not going to work, sometimes they have mounting holes that you can screw it to a board or something like that. And then the other thing I would ask the seller to do, and in today's smartphone age, they might even be able to take a video and send it to you, but the gears can get worn inside the gearbox.
Oh, sure.
When you start cranking these things, and you get it up to speed and you let go, the crank continues to rotate. There's no what's that called? Release, where basically that's the other thing to pay attention to. Watch your hands. The crank keeps spinning around. Generally your hands on the crank while you're sharpening anyway, but when you stop, don't step back because your knuckles gonna get wrapped by that thing running around. Well, I think what's happened is that's happened where somebody's gotten their hand whacked or it's bumped up against them or and it's the handle gets forced to a stop. Well, that's really bad on the gears. It's like throwing your Volkswagen Bug in reverse at 60 miles an hour. Bad for the gears, and it strips them. So they'll turn the crank and the wheel starts turning, but when it gets to a certain speed, it makes this god awful rattle noise in the it kind of freewheels, grinding wheel freewheels. Or when you grind it and then you stop grinding and you step away, the handle's still turning, but as it slows down, you'll hear it make that rattle as the gears are slipping because the gears have gotten stripped. That's not something that I want to do either. I don't want to open the gearbox up and recut teeth and all that because you're reducing the diameter of these things.
Yeah.
So what I would the email I send to them is, can you remove the wheel? What is the diameter of the arbor? And when you crank it, is there any play? Does it rattle? Does it work? In other words, and if you're so bold, ask them to send you a video of it in use. Crank it up and let it slow down. If the gears are stripped as it slows, it's going to slip. Because if you think about it, it's a reversal of the force as it starts to slow down. The handle itself has a certain mass, and it gets to the point where the mass of the handle is too much for the gears to turn it anymore, and they'll slip.
Yep.
So that's generally an indicator. I have 3 hand crank grinders, one of which has the gears stripped, and there's nothing I can do to it. It's sitting in a back of a drawer in my shop. So that's really it. Those are the things to look for. It's nice if it has a tool rest. Don't panic if it doesn't.
Yeah, you can always retrofit a newer one on there or something. So.
I've seen where guys will actually attach the grinder permanently to a piece of plywood, kind of a little sharpening bench hook, if you will, and they'll buy an aftermarket tool rest and screw it onto the plywood. The tool rests that come with these things are not glamorous. It's just basically an angle iron, which is fine. I've kept mine because basically all I ever do is grind a 25-degree angle.
Hmm.
It's rare that I ever need to change that. So it's kind of a pain to set the first time, but I never touch it. So I've set it at 25 degrees and I've just left it there for a year. And if I'm ever changing the angle on something, it's usually in a micro bevel, which is done on a stone, not on a
Yeah.
grind. So that's something that, if for some reason it's missing that little piece of angle iron, go to Home Depot and buy an angle iron, or woodworkers. You could figure something out.
Oh yeah.
So,
I
if
probably
you're, if
got
you're
something in the
looking,
shed.
yeah, right. If you're looking at two different ones that are the same price on eBay and one has a tool rest, bid on that one.
Yep.
But it's not the end of the world there. And ultimately, that's it. Those are the things to really look for to make sure you don't end up one that can't be serviced. So once you get it in your shop, pull off any of the rust, use whatever you would use to remove rust from a hand plane. I personally like a vapor rust. It's not so what's the word I'm looking for?
Pungent.
Volatile and pungent. Yes. It won't eat the nose hair out of your nose. You don't need. I guess technically you should wear gloves, but it doesn't even say to wear gloves on the package. So I think you're okay there. You remove the rust. Most of these have a little port to drop oil into the gearbox. Personally, I took the gearbox apart and I just cleaned everything because it was a little dusty, and then just put it all back together and dropped a couple of things of the same oil that you use for when you turn off your air compressor. You should drop some oil in there to keep the hoses lubricated. Any old oil will work,
Okay.
machine box oil. I put a couple drops in there and I haven't done anything since in a year, and it still hums along nicely. And then get a new grinding wheel. And the Norton 3X wheel, the blue ones, pick your favorite grit. I think I have a 60 grit wheel on mine. Because I want to get it done fast.
Yeah, and I mean it's the way I'm looking at it. It's for shaping when it's beyond just touching it up on the stones anymore. Anyway, so
Absolutely. And just a grinding tip. You either are grinding because you've got a nick in the edge and you
Mhm.
need to grind that out, or you're grinding because your micro bevel's gotten too wide.
Mhm.
Well, if it's in the latter instance, you grind until the micro bevel is almost gone.
Mhm.
Don't grind until the micro bevel is gone. Because obviously right out of the tip, that metal is very thin.
Yes.
So it's going to heat up very fast. So if you grind off the micro bevel, there's a greater chance of you drawing the temper out of the steel. So grind until there's still that little bit of a micro bevel left, then you're fine. In fact, you just go right back to your stone and just hone that micro bevel. So, which I guess you had another question about just kind of how to use it. Well, actually, before I go there, get a diamond dresser at the same time you buy the grinding wheel.
Yeah.
Just one of those little, what do you call those? Not the single point ones. It looks like a T.
T-handle looking thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Although I think a single point would probably work too. But what I've found, what was I don't know how do you politically correctly say this? An old woodworking curmudgeon, one of those old
Yep.
geezers, has more knowledge in his head than anybody. He taught me to slightly convex the face of your stone. So with the diamond dresser, you kind of slightly remove the edges. So the stone itself is convex. So
Mhm.
what happens is when you're grinding, you're only grinding on one point, the center of the stone. And that really helps prevent you from burning your tool.
Hmm. That's cool.
So it sounds counterintuitive. It's like, well, I'm going to throw my edge out of square. Well, again, realize where grinding is rough work.
Yeah.
You're going to refine that edge. If you end up slightly out of square, who cares? You can bring it back into square on the stone, especially if you use a honing guide.
Mhm.
You can very quickly do that. So the making it slightly convex, and actually, I think Fine Woodworking just did a tip like this. Because I remember reading that in Fine Woodworking, and I was really excited that I actually knew that tip already. Like, yay! I've made it. So that diamond dresser would be really useful. You just drop it on the little rest, the tool rest, and just kind of rotate it around a single point. So you get it's almost not visible. You're not like putting a quarter-inch radius on this thing. It's just almost not visible. So if you hold a straight edge up to it, there's a tiny bit of light under the straight edge on the edges of that, and it gives you a lot more accuracy too, because you know exactly where you're grinding, and you're not having to like pay attention to the entire width of the chisel blade or the plane iron blade or whatever.
Sure.
You know that it's grinding right in the center, and you just work that across. And when you look at the bevel and you say, "Ooh, I need to remove a little more from the left," well, you know exactly where to position it to grind that. Plus, less stone in contact with less steel means less heat.
Yep.
So that's the setup process of the whole thing, if you will. The other thing is set it to a point where the dust that comes off the wheel is, as you said at the outset of this, not going onto your workbench where wood's going to go,
Mm-hmm.
or on cast iron surfaces that will scratch it up or things like that.
Yeah.
I have it positioned on the edge of my sharpening station so the dust goes right on the floor.
Yeah, which is pretty much where I'm thinking of putting mine too, so that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess the way I look at it, the advantages of having one is, one, you can choose to grind slower and be a little more accurate in some ways. It's not that, one more. I am far from, strictly hand tools. I got a lot of power tools here, but it's one less thing that's, making a lot of racket down here. And I have a in the house basement shop, and the dust is more localized then, and I can try to turn slower or faster. And I'm like, well, I think it's about time I pick one of these up, and then I don't have to run out to the garage anymore.
Yep. You don't need a plug. You can put it anywhere you want. And I mean, honestly, Chris Schwartz did a blog on this. I mean, you can cook the steel on those real fast.
Mm-hmm.
They grind plenty fast. And in some respects, that's nice because you have that infinite variable speed of the hand crank.
Mm-hmm.
That if you are new to grinding and you are worried about that, you can slow it down.
Yeah.
It's going to take you longer, but with a coarse grit wheel, it's not going to take that long. And I like that it's totally portable.
Yeah.
You just unscrew it and you can take it wherever. So if you're like, actually, I just did this the other day. I took it out in the backyard and I attached it to the picnic table on the back deck, and I ground my lawnmower blade.
Oh, cool.
And it was awesome. I mean, because the lawnmower blade doesn't have to be sharp. It can come right off the grinder and you're ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
It was very cool. I was able to take it right out there. So, if you ever go to job sites, or heck, think of it this way. If you ever, go on vacation,
mm-hmm.
and, you're lucky enough to be able to like take some woodworking and sit out on the beach somewhere. Probably not the beach. But if you're on the beach, just use the sand.
Yeah.
That's really good. Just rub it in the sand. But you can bring a grinder with you and not worry, am I going to have a power outlet, all that stuff. There's a lot of cool mobility things, but they're just cool.
Yeah.
It's just really neat to be able to grind it. A little bit of a learning curve in that you're only holding the tool with one hand. But honestly, I think that's where people end up kind of white knuckling things, holding on to the tool so much. The realization is that I don't have to grind a perfectly square edge.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to grind a perfectly straight edge. That's what my stones are for. And that's what my honing guide is for. And even if you freehand sharpen, it's pretty easy to straighten out an edge by hand. If you can straighten out the edge of a board with a joiner plane, you can straighten out the edge of a chisel with a stone. It's the same process. Remove a little bit here, hit it with a square. Remove a little bit more, hit it with a square. So I think that our idea that the grinding wheel is a precision machine, I mean, that's ridiculous. There's nothing precise about that at all. So,
well, and I'm actually starting to use the guides, the honing guides for the micro bevel now. But for years, I only owned a set of 3 oil stones. And that's all I did. It takes a long time, but I learned how to sharpen, a hunting knives on it. And I figured, well, it's good enough for them. It's good enough for my other tools. And I mean, I can make those things sharp enough that, you can shave with them, no problem. And now I'm using, I have some ceramic ones for some things. I have sandpaper for, I use a specific method for a specific tool, and I'm comfortable with that. And I'm not comfortable with grinding most of them. And I'm like, this is a way that instead of sitting there forever on that coarse stone.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are definitely merits to the hollow grind. I really like it. And it's also an indicator, because the hollow grind, when you put it on the stone, you're going to polish the very tip and the very heel of the bevel. And you can see as those lines come together and meet, it's time to regrind,
Yeah.
essentially. Although it's actually time to regrind before that. You don't want a quarter-inch wide micro bevel. That's not a micro bevel anymore.
No.
That's a bevel.
No, that's the newly established bevel at that point.
But just so that we kind of close the loose ends here, because I always hate when people do podcasts and they don't have all the details in front of them.
Sure.
Expect to spend $20, we'll say, on
Mm-hmm.
a grinder, and then I just went to the Tools for Working Wood website. A new wheel is gonna run you 40. Yeah, it looks like $40
Okay.
for a new wheel. The diamond dresser is $40. It's the same as the wheel. So again, you're talking about $80, plus the $20 is $100. So yes, you
And a
could
little
go
bit
and
of
buy
time.
a powered grinder. You
Mhm.
could buy a powered grinder for the same thing, but aren't you going to kind of replacing the wheels anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that one of those things where you buy a Craftsman or whatever grinder, and the first thing you do is buy a good grinding wheel?
Oh yeah.
So you're going to spend $40 on a grinding wheel anyway. So yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of comes out in the wash, and it could end up being the same equal thing. The other thing is people often replace the tool rest on a powered grinding wheel anyway.
Oh
So,
yeah.
I don't know. It's a little. I categorize it as kind of a quirky tool. Um, Definitely people like me who really love hand tools and love kind of the history of it. I have a hand crank grinder because I'm a history buff and I think it's cool. If I had the space in my shop, I'd have a treadle natural sandstone wheel like Roy Underhill uses because it's cool. I've used one before. It's a lot of fun to work with, to sit in front of and pedal. It's very cool. But, that'd be like adding another machine to my shop, something else that has a footprint. So we won't be getting one of those anytime soon. That, and I'd probably get a hernia trying to lift a 24-inch sandstone wheel.
Yeah. I don't even want to think about doing that one.
Right. So does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it helps a lot. I'm actually looking forward to going out there and doing a little more research now, and I think I'm able to do so in a more educated way instead of, well, looks good.
Yeah, well, go and get your hand crank grinder before this publishes and the prices go up on eBay.
I don't think that enough people watch mine to do the Schwarz effect to that yet, though.
Well, yeah, I guess that's a good thing when you think about it, because Schwarz has been kind of espousing the merits of a hand crank grinder for more than a year now, and the prices are still where they are. So
Oh, well,
I don't think we're going to see the Schwarz effect here.
okay. There's enough of them out there yet, then.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a jack plane. There's hundreds of millions of them out there, so you can find.
All right. Well, hey, thanks a lot, Shannon. Thanks for the advice. I look forward to letting you know when I pick mine up.
Sure, my pleasure. Hey, you're a Hand Tool School member, so technically I'm obligated to do this for you.
Hey, anytime, man.
This is part of your membership. You just happen to be recording it.
Yep.
Right on. Well, I appreciate it. It's good to talk with you.
All right. Thank you very much.
We'll see you later.
Bye.